Welcome everybody to the Center for Unconventional Entrepreneurship. I have the honor to have today on the show what I deem to be a legend in the business space, Dr. Keith Fairhurst. Welcome. Thank you so much for your time today. Maybe you can share a little bit about your background for those who don't know you.
Hello, York, and thank you for that very flattering introduction. So my background is I come from a classical finance and strategy background, which is what I've studied. Having said that, I have, I suppose, some experience as an entrepreneur in that when I was in my late 20s, I started a business which I ran for 6 years and then sold. Started it in my lounge, a civil engineering, a specialist civil engineering company. So I kind of have some first-hand experience of what it's like to be a startup and not really fully appreciate where your next paycheck is coming from. And then I spent many years in big business after that again. And then in more recent times, 10 years ago, we started our current business called Unleash Consulting, which I started with a partner, Alistair McDuff. And we specialize, well, we're very fond of saying that we help people start businesses, grow businesses, save businesses, and sell businesses. So we sort of work throughout the enterprise life cycle. I have a particular interest in governance, but not from a classical tick box exercise point of view. I view it, and the lights came on for me when I forget who it was now, but it was some authority who said proper good corporate governance is just another name for performance management. And I kind of like that as a perspective for governance. So that's what piqued my interest. So I've spent the last probably 10 years as well looking at how independent input can help businesses thrive. And that's done in a governance sense, and it's done for all companies from small to large. And in my capacity as a turnaround specialist, where we at Unleash have focused on helping companies in distress as well, including business rescue in South Africa. That is what prompted my PhD research some years ago, where I researched the intersection of corporate governance and financial distress of privately owned companies. And so that's something of great interest to me, is the pitfalls we can avoid when trying to grow a private company, and how we can make best use of independent input into helping the company thrive. That's probably enough about my background.
Keith,
but I don't know if it prompts any questions for you.
So on that, I think that's a wonderful place to start, given the times that we're currently going through. Companies in distress. How, on a very practical level, York's company is struggling. We have no idea how to, for a variety of reasons, whatever the reason may be. I call Keith, I call Unleash, they come. How do you manage to zero in on the issue, and I mean, maybe not always, but to start working the real problem when so many entrepreneurs seem to be drowning?
Yeah. So it's a very, very interesting question. And of course, when we look at the topic of entrepreneurship, I think there's enough evidence around to show that entrepreneurs, they buck the system, because there are many entrepreneurs there where the odds are stacked against them, and yet they persevere through it. And that is so often what is necessary in any company or business that is in distress. So it starts with crisis management. And I sent you the article I wrote on leading in a crisis. And
I'll put the link on the talk below.
Okay. And you know, the first 3 points, it talks to this topic called resilience. And the very, very, very first point is that the leadership of the organization needs to accept there is a problem and recognize there's a problem. That's the first point. And we so often, and I'm talking about outside of lockdown, outside of the COVID crisis that we're experiencing at the moment, I'm talking about under normal economic circumstances where a business gets into crisis, they have a problem, and the director or the owner or the shareholder will just not see it, and they will imagine there isn't a problem, and think that if we carry on miraculously, next week will be different. And unfortunately, we see that very often. So it is essential. It is absolutely essential that the key person, the owner, the shareholder, the director, actually recognizes the reality of the situation. Now, right now with Corona and COVID-19, I mean, it is so in our face, we just cannot ignore it. It's there, you know. So even the individual who may be inclined to sugarcoat most circumstances will find it difficult to sugarcoat this one. So that's the first thing, is that the people that are resilient and seem to successfully get through distress situations start by accepting the reality of the situation. That's the first thing. The second thing that they do is they become very inventive. They become creative. They become enterprising with the resources they have available. They don't we have in business rescue and turnarounds, we have a favorite saying, and that is that everybody wants another 10 million rand or dollars, or it depends which country you're in, but it's always 10 million. And if I just have this 10 million, then I will start the next Tesla or the next Google, or, you know, and everybody has that view. And we have a standard response, and we say, well, I've got bad news for you. That 10 million is going to give you a warm feeling until it's finished. And then you'll be back. Because they want 10 million, but they don't couple to that. What are they going to do differently? And if you carry on the way you've always carried on, you get what you always got. So unfortunately, that's something we see as well. But those people that get through that period are the ones who knuckle down and say, okay, so what can I do with what I've got? And there's a very interesting term in innovation called jugaad innovation, spelled Jugaad. And it comes from an Indian word from India, which is, it means it's to make do. And there is a whole field of thought around this now. It's worth Googling jugaad innovation and seeing what comes up. But it is, so the successful leaders, entrepreneurs that get through those periods are the ones that make do with what they've got, and they make a plan, and they become very enterprising. That's the second point. And then the third point is that they focus on a purpose that's greater than themselves. So we have found that the people that do this simply because, you know, it's a way of getting their you know, how do I fund the payment on my new car? Or how do I've got to have I've got to belong to the country club, or I've got to take my family on an international holiday, and that becomes their driver. Somehow those motivators and drivers are less successful. Whereas the entrepreneur or the business owner who says, my aim is to lead my marketplace through technical excellence and exceptional customer service. That's my main purpose, is to wow my client base on that basis. And I use that very specifically because one of my clients, that is their mantra, is we will lead with technical, and they're a bunch of scientists, we will lead with technical excellence, and we will be unparalleled in our customer service and response. And that is their focus. And those are the kinds of things that the successful turnaround leaders do well. So just to summarize those 3 points, the first one is face the reality. The second one is be inventive with what you got. Don't hold out and expect something to come from somewhere there and say, here's my white knight's going to save the day. And thirdly, remain true to your purpose. And if your purpose is to provide excellent takeaway meals, provide excellent takeaway meals and invest in doing that, as opposed to focusing on how you're going to buy the next branded motor car. Or
but Keith, and I'd like to unpack especially the first one, which is face the reality. When the proverbial shit hits the storm, often, and me having gone through a number of startups failures personally, you actually have no real clue of what is actually hitting you. You know, the clients are not buying, your invoice collection is not working. Whatever the case is, how do you unpack that? How do you unpack what is actually really the problem?
Well, we summarize it as follows and say, do we have a business? And just because I've got an idea that I think is brilliant, and I take it to market, and it doesn't land well. It's my idea, so of course, because it's my idea, I think it's a brilliant idea. Of course, it's a brilliant idea because it's mine. Well, of course, like yours is your brilliant idea. But unfortunately, if the market don't receive it well, there comes a time where you have to say, you know what, this is not working. What am I going to do differently? Now, in many respects, but that is normally phase two. If when you're in a startup mode, that preoccupies you because you're trying to gain some traction, which is a little different to a company that has perhaps sustained itself for a couple of years and has now got into difficulties because they have a market. So we kind of say, okay, so have you got a market? First question, have you got a market? Have you got customers? If the answer to that is yes, we say, okay, so have you got a product or a service or an offering that makes sense, that is compelling, that has a differentiator, that is good value for money? So we then assess the offering. And if you've got a market and you've got an offering, and then thirdly, I'm going to call it, if you've got a factory, which is means of production. If you've got a way of creating the product or the service and delivering it, then you're in the starting blocks. Now we've got some Lego pieces we can start putting together. The next question is, can I do it profitably? Because if you can't do it profitably, you cannot survive. So when we hit a crisis situation, it's like if you come across a person who's been injured through an accident, any paramedic will tell you, are they breathing? Is their heart beating? And we've got to stop the bleeding. It's no different you can draw a parallel, but it's not really different for an organization or a company that's in distress. The first thing is you've got to stop the bleeding. You've got to stop spending money that you don't have. Okay? Now, it's not complicated, but it's not always easy because there's often emotional components attached to it, and it's a very emotive period. So making the decisions is a hard decision, but you've got to face the reality is that if you are spending more money than you're getting in, you will go bankrupt. Simple as that. So, sell unnecessary assets, turn whatever you can into cash, cut down on costs, cut up the credit cards, whatever it is, you have to be absolutely ruthless in that regard. Okay, so that's the bleeding. You have to stop the bleeding. The second thing is that this patient needs to keep on breathing. And that's the organization needs to keep on working. It can't be frozen. So sometimes, they call it denial. The leader will go into denial and will just be frozen in their behavior. We had a case probably 10 years ago where the CEO would come in and he would just sit in his office and he would do nothing. But that's because he was frozen. He was absolutely frozen. It was the old deer in the headlights. So what we did, we would every morning do a short-term action plan with him. Say, right, by lunchtime, you've got to do these things. And then at lunchtime, he used to be quite fit. But he was down. So I used to send him to the gym at lunchtime. I said to him, you are no good to anybody if you're not healthy. Like, now get out of here. You've done what you had to do this morning. Take your gym bag, go to gym, and come back in an hour's time. And he did that. And then in the afternoon, and thankfully he was received the input well, and did it. And that business today is doing quite well. Actually, he's making profits, and 10 years later, it's successful again. So you've got to keep that patient breathing. So the business still has to operate. People still have to be on the telephone. They still have to be talking to customers. The factory must be running, and then of course the blood must keep flowing, and that is cash flow. You have to sell and collect your money. So those are the three kind of major focus areas. But we always start with the cash, because it's the cash that will, at the end of the day, or lack of cash, that will finalize the distress. So I don't know if that kind of helps explain it.
That is absolutely amazing. It sounds sometimes simple, but you know it yourself from the days of entrepreneurship, from having worked with so many entrepreneurs. When you're running a business, you're juggling so many priorities, so many balls of all sorts, from HR to invoice collection to product development, that sometimes you forget to keep it simple and focused. And you, some of my biggest mistakes, and that's why I value so much what you're saying, was scope creep. In if only we had this other features, customers will buy it. And so, you build, if only we had a bit more money to develop it, or a little bit more of that, or we're just waiting for that big contract to come through, and then we can become an Uber and sell products that don't actually make a profit. Keith, I think it's phenomenal. We can spend hours unpacking the three parts, and I don't want to do that too much. I think you've done a lot of work also in articles on your LinkedIn profile, which I'll put below this clip. Maybe let's step a little bit above the actual company. Let's sit into the boardroom. You sit on a number of boards, I think 5. What does the boardroom look like? And I'm cautious of saying in COVID times, but let's call it COVID times, because it doesn't get more stressful and uncertain than today. What does a boardroom environment look like in these days?
All right, let me put a little qualifier in before I answer it. I can only talk about the boardrooms that I see, and I can speculate about the boardrooms that I'm not involved with. And although I've been exposed to listed companies in the past, as I sit here today, none of the boards I sit on are listed companies. They're all privately held. So, and in my opinion, that brings with it a different set of dynamics, because although all companies are governed by the Companies Act, the legislation, listed companies have an additional set of requirements imposed on them by the stock exchange, and they are required to apply or explain King 4. So they are required to comply with King 4, and if they don't, to explain why not. Whereas for privately held companies, that is not a requirement. That is just a recommended best practice. So the dynamics are definitely different. And I guess the majority of your audience is probably privately owned companies as opposed to listed entities. So maybe what I'm about to say from my experiences and from what my research showed as well, what is would be more valuable to them. So, so that's just my little disclaimer up front, so that people can contextualize my commentary. So what I'm seeing is varying degrees of what's the right word? I want to say varying degrees of internalizing the problem. So, you know, like coping with it, and just being able to get on with things. So, in week 1 of lockdown in South Africa, I asked all business people, and this is boards I sit on, and also some business people that are outside of the boards I sit on. I asked them 3 questions. I said to them, what's occupying your attention at the moment as a leader? And 2, that was the first question. The second question is, what is the biggest challenge that you have? And 3 was, what obstacles do you see in solving your challenge? And in week 1, the answer to the first question was the same across the board. Pretty much everybody said the same thing. In week 1 is, I'm worried about my people. I don't know how to deal with my people. Are they going to go home? Do I pay them? Can I afford to pay them? What is the legal position? They were very worried about their people. Okay. The answer to the second question was, I don't know how to trade. I can't sell. I can't generate revenue. Now, my conversation were with people in some instances who are in retail and non-essential goods. And their revenue went from X to 0 overnight. From X to 0. And this is the particular one I'm thinking of is a very large company. Some of the others, their revenue had dropped by 50%, some by 60%. My firm of scientists couldn't execute their work, so theirs had dropped by 100%, or by 90%, because they had a little bit of laboratory stuff they could still do in the first week just to finish off. But it was, down to nothing. So that was the second question. I don't know how to trade. I don't know how to generate revenue. What do I do to generate revenue? And then the third question was, what are the challenges? And that it was linked to the second one. The answer came back, I've got to solve this problem of trading. I've got to be able to trade. That was in week 1. Then in week 2, I asked everybody the same questions. And only the answer to the first question changed. And they went from worrying about their people, because by now a week had passed and they dealt with most of that. They said, how long can I survive? That was the question.
Hello.
Sorry, Siri is now doing something on my phone here. it was listening. So Siri was listening to me and wanted to give me an answer. So the answer to the first question was, how can I survive? That's what was preoccupying them. Question 2 and question 3 answers remained the same. How can I generate revenue, and what obstacle? How can I create a system that allows me to? So it went on to, how can we survive? Now that has preoccupied the boardroom conversations. And where I've been involved with the boards, I saw the conversations freeze and have to be kicked open because people go into fight or flight. And I mean, I don't know if you are familiar with the grieving cycle, but this has been likened to the grieving cycle, that it starts with denial, and the behavior is a bit like, I don't believe it. This can't be happening. This is not right. Then once we get over that, we start bargaining and say, okay, like, can we negotiate? What can we do? How can we make it work? And how can we still sell and do a deal? So that's the second phase of negotiation. Then comes bargaining thereafter. It's denial, and then acceptance. When we get to acceptance, we say, okay, this is the circumstances. Now let's get productive and move forward. So I've seen that play out in the boardroom, where in the same breath, somebody will go from having a useful thought to being angry. So it just requires a bit of a level head, and to bring people back and say, okay, guys, let's just stop. Let's focus on it. So what I've been doing is having a conversation with executive directors and non-executive directors that goes something like this. Let's get a picture of how long our runway is. And our runway is how long can we run before we fall off the edge of the cliff under current trading circumstances. So if our revenue under lockdown dropped by 50%, how long can we survive under 50% revenue? How long is our runway before we cannot pay our bills? Then I talk about, hopefully the runway extends beyond lockdown. If it doesn't, then we're in deep trouble. Then I say, okay, so let's take the end of lockdown as a horizon, because what we can get a handle on is what we're dealing with today. We've got a sense of how's our revenue affected. We can understand what our costs are, what are our overheads. So we can go and apply some good thought to that, and we can probably create some sort of budget and a detailed cash flow. And we kind of are a little bit pedantic about cash flow. We say that's cash is king. Got to keep that blood flowing, so you've got to do the cash flow. Then we say, okay, so now lockdown is scheduled to finish now on the 1st of May. Then what? What does it look like after that? Well, I think there's probably only one person in the world who thinks he knows that. And he's sort of located in North America. But anybody who says to you they can tell you what's going to happen after lockdown is very brave. I certainly am not going to try and tell people. I'm saying to people, I think there are 3 things that we can be sure of. The first thing we can be sure of is that the world will be different in a month's time. The second thing we can be sure of is we don't know how it's going to be different. It's going to be different, but we can't say with any certainty how it will be different. I heard this morning that Britain has just extended their lockdown by a further 3 weeks. So now, I was trying to check the dates, but I didn't get to them before we started this call. But there is now that yesterday that they didn't have that, now they do. Okay, ours happened last week. So in a month's time, it is, I think, going to be impossible for us to say with any level of certainty what the changes are going to look like in the world. The third thing that we can be certain of is that we want to be part of the healthy group in a month's time. So we have to do everything we can as individuals, everything within our power. And I know that for some people it's more difficult than for others. Not everybody has the same living conditions, so it's very difficult. But certainly for business leaders and business owners, we have an obligation to do everything we can to remain healthy and ensure that the people we care about and the people that we work with do everything in their power to stay healthy, because we need as many healthy people in a month's time as we can have. So those are the three certainties that I think are worth considering. Then I talk to the boards and I say, well, okay, under that, what do we think it might look like? Well, the truth is, everybody says, well, we don't know. So I said, okay, so let's create three scenarios. So what we've been doing is creating a low road, a middle road, and a high road. And we're saying, if at the moment under lockdown, we are trading at, or we can achieve 30% of revenue or 40% of revenue. Let's, as the low road, say that once lockdown is lifted, we will continue to trade at that level. And under the worst case scenario, it'll take perhaps 2 years for it to creep back to pre-lockdown levels. That's the low road. The middle road is perhaps after lockdown, we will jump up to, say, 60% of pre-lockdown revenue, and it'll take 12 to 18 months to creep back. And the high road is we will jump back to 70 to 80%, and it'll take 12 months. Now, do you want to attach a probability to each of those scenarios? I think it's impossible, personally. You know my statistician friend Manoj, and Manoj and I discussed this as well. And so from a stats point of view, we also feel that it would be incredibly brave to attach probabilities to it. So, but we have three scenarios. Then under each scenario, I say, okay, so if scenario 1 plays out, what does the business need to look like? Scenario 2, scenario 3. And then say, spend a bit of time trying to identify signals or key indicators that might suggest to us which scenario might be unfolding, bearing in mind that it might unfold in ways that we haven't thought about yet. So we have to start looking for signals. So, we have to continue run a radar check of the horizon and see what's coming at us. Because from business rescue and turnarounds, we do have another saying. We say, you can only deal with what's in front of you. You cannot deal with stuff that's 3 months away today. You can only deal with what's in front of you. So I encourage people to think of lockdown as a horizon. Beyond the horizon, we cannot see what's there, but we can speculate. So if we start to speculate and we create a couple of scenarios, we can start thinking about how do we deal with them if those scenarios start to play out. And I think that equips us to be more agile than if we do no thinking. And it definitely equips us to be more agile than if we try and do business the way we did before COVID-19. So that's a long-winded way of saying break it into two sets of thinking. One is the one set of thinking which is to deal with the realities of today, the stuff that is concrete that you know about. And the other one is to deal with all of this uncertainty in an exploratory way. But while you're doing that, you have to preserve your resources as much as you can. So you've got to lengthen your runway. You've got to make your runway as long as possible.
Keith, I come from the school that says never let a good opportunity go to waste. And I dare say that I've never had any of my businesses, when they failed, that being a pleasant experience in any shape or form. You know, it's you take it personally. It's a financial catastrophe. It impacts you in many, many ways, psychological and emotional and physical. And I'm wondering, so sometimes we need a shock to the system to jolt us entrepreneurs into changing our business models, into shutting off an enterprise that maybe was never really taking off and was just dragging its feet for years. You know, I'm wondering, is this, and I don't mean it from a perspective of a human cost, of course, and the suffering to the millions of people, but from a jolt to the entrepreneurial heart. Is this an opportunity for us to say, hold on a second, do I really need an office? Can my workers not receive 20% less pay but work from home? Or do I need that much restaurant space? I don't know. Where do you see an opportunity in this?
York, it's very interesting that you phrase it like that, and I think you are. I think you're spot on. I think you're absolutely spot on. But it depends, of course, on how each individual chooses to view it. Because we could view it as a setback, or we could, people can choose to view setbacks in their lives as, poor me, why did it have to happen? And it's unfair and the world is against me. Or they can say, okay, so it happened. What can I learn from it? How can I go forward? So if we look at global research done on corporate failure, there is majority of times, I forget the exact percentages, but it's high, like more than 80% of failures occur because of management decisions and management actions, as opposed to external shocks to the system. Over time, over history. At the moment, of course, COVID-19 is a massive external shock. It's a massive external influence on the business, which we have no control over as individuals. All we can do is respond to it in the most constructive way, but we cannot control it. So I'm going to answer your question in a roundabout way, and I'm going to answer it with a saying that is attributed to Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett there's a quote of his which goes something like this. It says, when the tide goes out, you can see who's swimming without a swimming costume. And I think that's true right now. When a rising tide lifts all ships, even those that are not very good will still float higher. So when we're on when you've got a growth curve or a bull market or a bull economy, many systemic errors and weaknesses become glossed over. And because there's a lot of headroom in the economy, things that are not perfect can get a Band-Aid on, and the Band-Aid will hold it closed and keep it going while conditions are good. But when the pressure sets in, or there's a massive external shock like now, all of those weaknesses become super visible and become can become super critical, and can cause the downfall of a business which otherwise may have been able to sustain itself quite well. So I think it does. It forces us to take a long, hard look at our business. It forces us to take a long, hard look at how we manage, how we lead. It's just like the person who has a heart attack might be forced to have a long, hard look at their lifestyle choices. their diet, how much alcohol they consume, do they smoke, do they exercise, etc., etc., etc. So this may be similar. It will force that, and the organizations that have a good core, good fundamental underlying businesses or business kind of offerings, and are prepared and face the reality and deal with the defects and the imperfections, have the best chance of getting through the other side. So I think you're right. What will emerge is, stronger, more resilient businesses. The ones that can't do that may unfortunately not make it.
Keith, on this note, I think we kind of touched already on the answer also, or a roundabout way, and I would like to just get your view. Entrepreneurs are perennially optimistic bunch. The glass is half full when it's basically empty. There's always that one contract that will save the day.
One contract.
When does an entrepreneur persist, and when do you give up and throw the towel? What advice do you give to somebody? They always say, no, keep going. Real entrepreneurs just don't give up. But when is it a good time? And by giving up, or throwing the towel, I don't mean that it's a failure. The entrepreneur's a failure. It's just like we discussed. It's that business is not suitable right now in the market.
Yeah. So I would not choose the words give up. I would choose the words more about change tack rather than give up, because I don't think any true entrepreneur should give up. They should change direction, change their focus. I don't think there's a magic answer to that, but I think they need to consider some fundamentals, and that is like, do we have a business? Go back to the question: do we have a business? Because if you've got a hobby, something that maybe, to be absolutely ludicrous about it, let's say I like making widgets, whatever a widget is, and I think everybody in the world should own one, but not everybody in the world thinks they should own one. For me to continue trying to encourage everybody in the world to buy my widget when there's a handful of people that want it, and I can't, it's not sustainable as a business. I need to move on from that. Then it's a hobby. Then keep it as a hobby and go and find something that is productive to do. So I always encourage entrepreneurs to do the following: is to say, when I build the business, let me look at it from the perspective as, how can I create value in this business so that I can sell the business one day, or I can list it? Because now I'm creating economic value. I'm not just paying wages. And they must say, if I'm going to work in this business and I'm worth 1,000 Rand a month personally, they must pay themselves a salary. And they must budget for their salary of 1,000 Rand a month, and the rest they must take as a dividend. Now you're talking about an enterprise as opposed to a lifestyle, something that's funding a lifestyle. And that's a big shift in thinking. So I encourage entrepreneurs who truly want to make it and are serious about their business as opposed to about their lifestyle, because you can be serious about your lifestyle and you can be entrepreneurial, but all it's doing is funding your lifestyle. I would say that might not be the best approach to building a sustainable enterprise. Then if you think about it from an enterprise point of view, and you look at it and look at it and look at it, and it's not creating economic value, then it's time to cut it and say, can I earn more money as being employed by somebody? Then you must say, then it's perhaps not the right time. However, entrepreneurs, as you said, are notoriously enthusiastic about their idea, and they are the lifeblood of economic growth. So there's no magic answer, but what I do think is worth doing is getting independent views. So get some trusted advisors, and this is the role of independent board members. They are not vested in it. So they will ask the difficult questions that the entrepreneur does not ask, because the entrepreneur only sees the rainbow with this pot of gold at the end. They do not see the storm clouds. They do not see the open felt that you've got to cross. They do not see that. They can only see the rainbow. And you need a balanced view. So I encourage all entrepreneurs to find a trusted person, advisor, who will give them objective input, who is interested about the enterprise being successful, and will then eventually say, will be honest enough with the entrepreneur to say, I cannot see the economic model. Okay? I can't understand how you're going to turn this into a profit. And if the entrepreneur cannot explain that successfully to a trusted advisor, then it's going to be, I think, very difficult for them to turn it into a reality. The best case study in this regard is probably Google. So when Google went to, I think they went to Golden Gate Capital, I can't remember the private equity fund or venture capital fund they went to, and they wanted $1 million in the early days. They just started. You can read it in the Google story. The private equity fund or the venture capitalist said, we'll give you $1 million, but we're also giving you the CEO that has to run the business. They gave them this guy Harry Schmidt. And both, the founders of Google said they believe that if they had not done that, they would have not been successful. So there's probably the best case study that I can think of an independent business perspective being very influential on two of the greatest entrepreneurs we can think of. So I encourage all entrepreneurs to do that. Find that person, find that board member. Don't use your accountant, don't use your banker. Find the person who's independent, who can see the business in an objective way and ask the difficult questions.
Keith, unbelievable advice. Thank you so much for your time, for sharing so much knowledge and perspective and sobriety and soberness in such difficult times. I think a lot of entrepreneurs out there, the COVID is going to be a very hard slap in the face. I don't wish it on anybody when you have to make a decision to close your business, but like Keith mentioned, and I also truly believe, sometimes a good slap on the face is the reality, the wake-up call that you needed to take stock and go to version 2 of your business dreams. Keith, thank you so much again for your time. Really, truly appreciate it. And thanks everybody for watching.
Thanks, Jörg.